I am a huge fan of the Souls series. I think they are all amazing games that are so focused with well-tuned combat and gameplay. Elden Ring, of course, is the pinnacle of this, with some of the tightest gameplay and most expansive world to explore. Now, as much as I like these games, I really haven't ventured out too far into the genre that's been populated since the Dark Souls popularity began. Most of the games that I have played with Souls-like elements usually just take bits and pieces rather than trying to recreate the entire feel of the Souls games. But I figured it was time enough to go and explore some of these other copycat games that have popped up since the Souls genre has really exploded in popularity. The Surge 2 takes the Souls genre into the future with a apocalyptic AI, nanobot, techie, dystopian world for you to explore and fight through. But is it able to take down the king of the genre? Or is it just not that great? Let's talk about it. The one thing I've found in the limited Souls game experience that I have is, for whatever reason, other game developers just really struggle to match that balance and smoothness that the Souls games have when it comes to combat. Even going all the way back to Demon's Souls, which is the clunkiest, there's still something about how it all comes together that just really feels good. And when I've tried to play some of the other games in the genre, like Lords of the Fallen or Mortal Shell, the enemies maybe are tough and you have a stamina bar, but it just never really has that same feel that the Souls games have been able to accomplish. The Surge 2, I think, is very close. It comes very close in the combat, but definitely still is missing whatever that little bit of magic is that makes the Souls games feel so good to play. And that's not to say that it's bad. I actually quite enjoyed the combat in this game, but the whole time I was playing, it did feel like I was playing an imitation of a Souls game rather than another Souls game. Now, while it may not be as smoothly implemented, there are some really cool ideas that the Surge 2 introduces to its combat that I would love to see in future Souls games. The first of which is the directional blocking system. When an enemy attacks you, they will attack from one of the 4 directions, and if you can block in the correct direction at the right time, that is how you do the parry. That just makes combat feel a little more engaged, and really, I thought, added a lot to the combat experience. The enemies would essentially fake you out. They would go to attack and kind of hesitate themselves, and sometimes it even felt like there was almost variable timings on their attack, where I thought I would have their attack patterns down, and they would do something that kind of threw me off. I could see how that could be frustrating, and sometimes it was frustrating for me. At the same time, thought it was a nice addition as well to the game. It really makes it feel a little more, dare I say, realistic. I don't know. I think that one's debatable on whether that's an overall good thing or not, but it is still nice to see them trying new things. The game also really ties in progression to combat, which I think is great because the whole point of these games is their combat. So in this game, you will upgrade your armor or weapons with armor and weapon parts that you pick up from enemies. In order to get those parts, you have to target the specific body part of the enemy you're fighting, and you'll only really get resources if the part that you're targeting is armored. So there's always this trade-off of, do I want to get more resources? Do I just need to kill this guy quickly? Especially when you're fighting groups, you're going to want to target an unarmored part and then maybe focus on the last guy to get the parts you need. It also means you have direct control over your character's development. If you found a new leg piece, for example, that you really want to level up, then you can easily do that. You just go farm those parts. So it's a great way that gives you control, not only in your own progression, but also in the essentially difficulty of the enemies. I also really liked the battery idea that they use in this game. Unlike Dark Souls, here you gain charge as you fight the enemy. That charge can then be used for injections. The most basic injection is a heal. You can get others as you go through the game that will do other things, such as refill your stamina or even give you strength bonuses, things like that. So not only is there the trade-off in what you want to use these batteries and charges on, it also forces you to stay aggressive. You can't really fall back and heal up like you might be able to do in the Souls games because you won't have the battery for it. I think that they balanced it a little too generously to the player, especially later game when you get some additional upgrades for your character that allow you to store some of those charges. You can be walking around with like 8 heals essentially going into bosses, and that can make them feel easy. This game is definitely not as difficult as the Souls games are. I was able to go through it relatively quickly. At the end of the game, they actually show you your stats and compare it to the average, and I think I was able to make it like, I had finished in 16 hours, and I think that was about 10 hours under the average, and I am definitely far from the best Souls player in the world. The combat, though, is still fun enough. The world itself, though, is where this game really shines. They took that idea of the interconnected area that Dark Souls kind of introduced and cranked it up to 11. This is essentially a Metroidvania-type world. As you reach different checkpoints in the story, you will unlock new traversal options that will let you get through different pathways. Ultimately, the game map is actually very small but very vertical, as you have multiple levels and layers to each of these areas. I don't know why it's so satisfying to me when you finish a boss or something and exit the arena only to find out you're back where the game started. That always just makes I feel so cool. It feels so cool when that happens to me for whatever reason. And I really enjoy that in games, and the Surge 2, that just keeps happening. You'll finish one area, you'll get to the lift or whatever, and it'll take you back to the initial save point that you started the game at, and it's like, oh my god, that's awesome. For all of the technical themes going on in this game, I did think the world itself was a little bland. It's really just a city with the occasional nano mech bot thing floating around or military checkpoint. I wasn't too wowed with the visuals of the world, but the layout of the world and how you explore it is actually great. This game has more of a traditional story as well than the Souls games have. There's a lot more dialogue and cutscenes, but ultimately it's just your generic nanobot end of the world thing. The nanobots are coming. One guy wants to use them to cleanse humanity. This other person wants to use them, to destroy humanity, pick a side or whatever, and you're the chosen one because you can symbiotically grow with these nanomachines or whatever. I don't really know. It's not anything that's gonna blow your mind. There's a lot of audio logs that you pick up as you explore the world. These range from fine to sorta interesting. They don't really do a ton to tell the story. It's, again, what you would expect. Recordings of the end of the world because of these nanobot things taking over and the army coming in to round people up and quarantine them, and these different factions forming and people and everybody's killing each other. And I don't know, it just didn't really do much for me. I don't think that's why you're here with these kinds of games. You're not really here for a deep story. You're here to experience the combat, explore the world, and fight the bosses. Speaking of bosses, it did not feel like there were as many bosses as I expected. I don't know if Elden Ring has just spoiled me that I think there's going to be 500 of these bosses, but the bosses that the game does have are all fairly unique from one another, with a lot of unique playstyles. Usually the boss is in some kind of mech that you'll have to take down, destroying its different parts, before either fighting them one-on-one or just killing them in their mech. The fights themselves are pretty engaging, usually take a few tries before you kind of get the hang of it. I thought they were, on the whole, pretty great. There were none that I thought were unfairly challenging. There were really none that felt too similar to any others, so it never really felt like there was too much repetition. The game also has some side quests. These, again, are pretty basic. You'll talk to somebody and they'll tell you to go somewhere or find somebody to either kill or get an item from them or give them or whatever. Again, nothing crazy, but if you do feel like some additional exploration, there is some of that to go around. I didn't really do a ton of them if I did not find the people I was supposed to be finding as I explored the worlds, and I do try and explore every part of the map as I go through it, but I don't know, I just miss things sometimes, I guess. I didn't really find a ton of them. I did a few of them, but none of them were really so engaging that I felt like I needed to see them to completion. Interestingly, too, I felt like there was almost an overwhelming amount of variety when it came to armor and weapons. As you go through the game, you'll find new armor and weapon variants. Earlier parts of the game, it's at a pretty reasonable pace, I would say. You kind of get comfortable with what you have. You unlock a new set of armor that maybe is a little stronger, has different elemental resistances. You get a new weapon type. Then, about halfway through the game, towards the end game, you suddenly have like 50 different weapons, 15 different armor types. I was fighting one of the bosses in the late game that was using a lot of electric attacks, and so I wanted to craft this armor that had really good electric resistance. But I realized it was just going to take so long to go farm up the parts to it that I just said screw it and stuck with the armor that I had and just kind of brute force the boss rather than go through. So I see what they were trying to accomplish, but at the same time, I think they almost give you too much variety that it's hard to keep them up to the level that you're currently at, and so you have to really pick maybe one, maybe two that you kind of continually upgrading, unless you really want to grind out all these different weapon and armor parts to keep them all at the correct level for your character. At the end of the day, The Surge 2 is a solid Souls-like game. I still don't think it reaches the same level of quality as the mainline series itself, but it's a setting that you don't really see in these types of games, a more futuristic, modern setting, and I think it has some really cool ideas that they tried to implement in the combat with the body part farming, as well as the directional blocking and the battery and injectables idea. And I think if you balance those a little better, you could really add a lot more challenge to the game and really show off the trade-offs that they were trying to impose on the player. But at least for me, I felt like the game's lower difficulty didn't really force me to make the kind of trade-off decisions that I think the developers intended me to make for most of my playthrough. For a final rating, I would give the presentation a 3.5 out of 5, the story a 2.5 out of 5, and the gameplay a 4 out of 5 with a final rating of 4 out of 5. And for value, I'd say this is absolutely worth it. If you're looking for a new Souls-like to play, if you finish playing Elden Ring for the 100th time and you just are looking for something similar but a little different, I think The Surge 2 is definitely worth checking out. But what do you think? What's your favorite Souls-like game? Let me know in the comments down below. Is it The Surge 2? Do you want to see some of these combat mechanics implemented into the next Elden Ring or Dark Souls game or whatever the next FromSoft game is? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, do remember to like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all with the next video.